Let's talk about the outlook of what this means for the sector as a whole. Joining in is Ravi Uppal. He's the chairman, Siscol, and the former managing director and group CEO at Jindal Steel. And we've also got Mr. Paul Bartholomew, who's the senior managing editor, S&P Global Platts. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking time out and joining in. Mr. Uppal, I'm going to begin with you. In your time as the head of JSPL, India was always complaining about the issue of steel dumping. But today we're seeing India selling steel to China and even beyond to other countries. Do you think that the Indian steel sector has now found a permanent market overseas?
Has been a net exporter for the last couple of years. The Indian steel capacity has risen to a level of nearly 140 million tons. And last year they produced finished steel more than 100 million tons. And then export has always been on the hit list of the Indian industry. And I think everything is going well for the Indian industry to be very competitive. Especially our integrated steel plants are adopting the best of the technologies. They have come off age. The cost is very competitive. And I think that India has every case to go for exports. And if they're exporting to China, it should come as no surprise. The Chinese industry in the first 6 months of this year, have made a big recovery. Their lowest point for the month of February. But after that, right up to June, July, the steel production in China has really picked up. They come back to the old volume to nearly 80-85 million tons a month. And in this effort, they wanted to import the iron ore, they wanted to import the semi-finished goods, and that is precisely what they have done from India. They have not bought from us fully finished steel, but they've been buying the semis, what we call as billets, ingots, rounds, which they use to produce the final product. So I think India is very well poised for exports, be it China, Japan, Korea, or it is the Western European market. The West European steel industry has really not done well in the recent months, partly because of COVID. And now they suddenly have a demand for finished products of steel. And I think they can look up to India. India is well poised to export steel, both in semi-finished form and fully finished form.
Okay, so looking now as a destination with a permanent market abroad. Mr. Bartholomew, while we have seen steel output at a record high in China in the month of August, we understand that production at some of the key mills seems to be slowing down in September. Is this indicative of a peak, or is consumer demand starting to slow?
Yeah, it's actually the market's changed quite a bit in September. It's been incredibly strong in China. I think 2 of the last 3 months were record crude steel production. COVID hasn't slowed China down at all, but the picture's really started to change in September, and that's partly because I think to a certain extent prices ran up very, very high, and there's a little bit of a correction in the Chinese market at the moment. And also the Chinese government put a lot of, pumped a lot of credit into the market, basically. So people had a lot of cash. They didn't have to sell off their inventories. They were a bit more sort of circumspect about selling. That's changed quite a bit now. China's really tightening up on the financial side, which is impacting the property construction and infrastructure. And that's been sort of flowing through to steel and iron ore prices. And so we think probably August was the peak production month, this year, and it's just going to sort of start to tail off a little bit. So Q4 is not going to fall over, but it's going to be a bit softer than Q3 was, calendar Q3, I mean.
Sure. Mr. Uppal, what do you think in terms of prices as well? Now that they're at import parity, any room for further hikes? And also, how closely do you feel with, we take cues from the Chinese steel prices?
The prices of steel, if they will go up further, is going to depend on 2 things. What is the demand and supply situation? And also the prices of the raw material. When I talk about demand, it's basically both domestic demand as well as export demand. So even if there is a bit of a slowdown in export, I think the domestic market is really picking up now. A lot of projects are taking off. Automotive industry has got into full gear. I mean, a company like Maruti have decided to work all 7 days in a week for the next couple of weeks. So that's a good sign. So I don't think that for India, the export demand is going to fall. It may not grow, but it's going to remain flat. India exported about 5.5 million tons of steel in the first 5 months. That's not a bad sign. Our imports have fallen. So I think on total, the Indian steel industry has a good promise from the domestic sources as well as from exports. And the prices will depend on demand and supply. In the last 2 months, the demand has been very firm, and therefore prices have picked up. It will also depend as to what are the prices of the iron ore, coking coal, the input material, and the iron ore has really picked up in the recent months. And India did almost export, record export of iron ore and the things like the pellets, etc., in the last 3 to 4 months. So I think the prices may go up. They may stand. If the Chinese, imports come down, then of course, there may not be much of an upsurge in the prices. But I think they will at least stay at the level that we have if they don't increase.
Okay. Paul, while iron ore and rebar have both been, of course, rallying in China, the latter's pace hasn't been as quick. And now, of course, with coking coal prices also moving. So are we seeing pressure on Chinese steel mill margin? Will they be curtailing output? And on the supply side as well, do you still see further challenges, at this point of time that could possibly give iron ore prices another shot at a rally?
Yeah, you're absolutely right about steel margins. They've completely come off, actually. I was just checking, before we talked to you today, and the Chinese domestic hot rolled coil prices that we look at, they've fallen from about $55 at the start of September to about $17.50 yesterday. Rebar sort of come off about half of what it was at the start of September. It's now about $15. So that is creating a lot of margin pressure. So what does that mean? Does it mean they're going to sort of push back on iron ore prices, or are they going to cut production? We see a little bit of softer production, but typically Chinese mills are very, very reluctant to cut steel production. And they only really do so if they're sort of told by the government that they have to for environmental reasons, or if market prices are very, very low for a sustained period. So we don't sort of see steel production coming off too dramatically. In fact, we lifted our forecast for the year from 2% crude steel production increase in China. So we've got about 4 to 5% now for the year, which is remarkable when you consider that China produced 996 million tons last year. Iron ore prices have come off. They were $117 yesterday. They're about 130, almost 130 a week ago. So I think we'll see a little bit of pressure on iron ore prices. We did a Q4 sort of outlook survey where we talked to the market, and I think most people see prices around about half of the people we spoke to saw prices between 100 and 110, which I think is sort of fairly realistic. You could argue the 130 was just too high and the prices sort of ran up. But I think China's producing too much steel to see iron ore prices fall off too much. And iron ore supply is quite tight now. Vale in Brazil is still sort of catching up from some problems they had. There's not a lot of iron ore to go around at the moment. And even, India's not exporting much because they're lifting, countries lifting its domestic steel production as well. So, as I say, we see a bit softer in calendar Q4, but not noticeably so. And we've got China's October holiday now, the Golden Week at the beginning of October. So typically people will just sort of wind down between now and then. They'll wait to see what happens when they come back from their holiday. So I think we'll see a bit more price softening over the next week, and then we'll just have to look at what's happening, second week of October when the Chinese market kicks up again.
Right. Mr. Uppal, how closely do you think that Indian steel prices take cues from the Chinese steel prices?
Well, they do get influenced by the international prices, be it from China, from elsewhere. But, there's one thing I like to mention here. The prices in the domestic market are not only dependent on, the export demand. It also depends on how much supply we are able to do. India's total capacity, production capacity is about 140 million tons, and we produce about 110 million tons of crude steel. And 62 to 64% of this comes from organized sector, what we call as the integrated steel plant. They have made a quick recovery. They're back on their feet. They're trying to sort of really flog the horse as much as they can. The capacity utilization of some of the units is between 85 to 90% already now. But the unorganized sector, still taking time to come into production, and they make up nearly 35% of India's production. Things like, the basic semis and TMT, wire rod, these are products, a lot of them are get done in the unorganized sector. So, the prices may have a tendency to go up until the unorganized sector also comes into full production. They have been slow to act because they didn't have labor, they didn't have resources. But I think they're getting into the act. And if they get into production, that will also arrest any further growth in the price levels. So it's a function of both demand and supply. Supply has to go up for the Indian prices to stabilize. India's prices are already higher than the lower compared to the international prices as of now. So therefore, there's no threat of much imports. The imports in the first 4 months of the year have been very low, just about 1.5 to 1.6 million tons. So I think all total, the Indian prices will stabilize if the unorganized sector comes into full production, which should happen before the end of this calendar year.
All right, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure having you on board just to understand what the outlook is for the industry as a whole, the opportunity it presents for India, as well as the outlook on prices. We'll let you go on that note.